Hello and welcome to Outside the Book, coming to you live from the 2016 Southern Kentucky Book Festival. I'm Barbara Deeb, and we are delighted to kick things off with the headliner for this year's festival, J.A. Jance. J.A., it's so nice to see you.
I'm happy to be here, and you need to know I was here a couple of years ago, and I am a fully certified Kentucky Colonel. They gave me the plaque.
Okay, so there you go. You got to go to the Derby now. But now, J.A., I read somewhere that you use your initials because early on a publisher told you writing about a male detective, you would have a better shot by not being a female.
Yes, so for the first 9 books, there was no author bio, there was no cover photo, and that gave rise to the rumor that a retired Seattle homicide detective writes these books.
Oh.
When I finally got my picture on the cover, I thought that would change. Now they say a retired cop writes these books, and she's just a front for him.
So now you know the real story. It's Judith Ann, J.A. Jance. You know, mystery and thrillers. Has that changed over the course of, you've written more than 50 books. Has the way you write a mystery changed?
The way I write a mystery has not changed. I think I grew up reading John D. MacDonald, and the thing about John D. MacDonald's Travis McGee is he never changed. He was always the same guy and always made the same mistakes, and he getting beaten up, but he was fine the next day. And so my characters have families and pets and responsibilities outside, and they have changed. Bo started out drinking the way my first husband drank, and I wrote that in because I'd been there for 18 years and I knew how that worked. But then people started worrying about him, and that's how he ended up going into treatment in book 8. And so with 21 and a half Beaumont books now, there have been a lot more books with him sober than drunk. But people still tell me, some people, they preferred him when he was drinking. And I worry about those folks.
That having been said, that speaks volumes, no pun intended, about the way your readers react to your characters, the richness.
They see them as people. They see them as friends that they can revisit. And if I don't write one of those books fast enough, they sort of gripe at me and saying, isn't it time for this? Isn't it time for that? But I'm able to tell stories through mysteries that I think are important. In Beaumont book 21, Second Watch, I have him interact with a boyhood friend of mine, a guy from Bisbee, Arizona, who died in Vietnam in 1966. And so I used a mystery to mix fact and fiction and pay tribute to not only Doug Davis, the guy from Bisbee, but to Bonnie Abney, the girl he was engaged to when he died.
Give me the elements, in your opinion. What makes a good mystery?
There have to be people you care about. For a while, my husband was studying painting with that guy who was on PBS. You know, the one with the fuzzy hair. I can't remember his
Bob
name.
Ross.
Bob Ross, thank you. And so I was watching Bob Ross with him, and he said, in art, you have to have light and dark. It's the contrast between light and dark that makes art work. And I realized how much that applies to writing books too. And if it's all gray, if everybody dies and there's nobody to care about, what's the point?
What's the point? I was asking you before we got started about some of your early inspirations. You know, as a mystery writer, were you drawn to certain mystery writers or just writers in general?
I was drawn to writing. I won a scholarship to the University of Arizona. I enrolled as an English major in 1962 because I wanted to be a writer. In 1964, I tried to enroll in the creative writing program, and the professor said, "You're a girl. Girls become teachers or nurses, boys become writers," and he wouldn't let me into his class. So in my first hardback, Hour of the Hunter, the crazed killer turns out to be a former professor of creative writing from the University of Arizona. That's, that's an influence.
I would say, she told me before we got started, do not make a mystery writer mad, because apparently it is these instances often that serve as the catalyst for some of your plots.
Oh yes, there was the bad dentist in my hometown who traumatized a whole generation of Bisbee kids. And we're all white-knuckled dental patients because of it. But I got over it. I knocked off a dentist in book number 5.
And you mentioned an anchor woman who was discriminated against because of her age,
Yes.
also served as the inspiration.
Yes. Patty Weiss was a news broadcaster in Tucson, Arizona. She had started with KBOA TV while she was still in college. So at age 53, I was sitting there. I needed to write a book. And I had a terrible case of writer's block, so I was watching the news. And she was there on the noon news, and she was gone at the 5 o'clock hour.
Oh.
And in the hours in between, her 35-year-old news director come to her desk, told her she was too old for an anchor desk, and escorted her from the building. Within minutes, I was writing about Allie Reynolds being yanked from her anchor desk in L.A. and coming home to Sedona, Arizona to put her life back together. And Clawback is Allie Reynolds' number 11.
Number 11. We're so quickly running out of time. I could spend the next 3 hours with you. But 2 questions. How do you write? What's your formula? Do you have a specific space? Do you have to sharpen pencils? Do you use a computer? How do you write?
I use a computer. My first computer I bought with the life insurance proceeds from when my first husband died of booze at age 42.
The alcoholic.
And
okay.
so I took 10% of the $50,000 and bought a computer. So I work on a computer. That computer was an Eagle with 128K of memory. But I work on a laptop wherever my lap and brain and fingers are. I sit out on patios, I sit on porches, I sit in family rooms, I sit in living rooms, I sit on airplanes. I do not believe in outlining. I met outlining in 6th grade. I hated it then, I hate it now. So because I write mysteries, I start with somebody dead and spend the rest of the book trying to figure out who did it and how come.
There you go. What a pleasure to chat with you. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you.
We've been talking with author J.A. Jance. Outside the Book continues. We're talking now with Richard Wall. And the name of the book that he's here talking about is Mr. Owida's Guide to Gardening, How I Learned the Unexpected Joy of a Green Thumb and an Open Heart. But it's written by Carol Wall. So maybe we should call this next interview segment A True Love Story. This is beautiful.
Yeah.
This is dedicated to your late wife.
Yes. Well, she wrote this book. She signed her publishing contract in 2011, and the 3 years between the signing of the contract and the publication of the book in 2014, she was really living a dream few writers get to realize. She had a superstar agent, she had a rock star editor, she got a big advance, and she was in People magazine, New York Times Book Review, Oprah.com. But in 2012, her breast cancer metastasized and came back for the 3rd time. And she was never able to go out and promote the book. So she was in the hospital on publication day in March 2014. She died in December 2014. And so now it's me.
And you've taken it upon yourself. How many states did you tell me you've been to book festivals?
I think we
in?
counted the other day, not just book festivals, but I do a lot of, because of the subject matter of the book, I do a lot of church groups, I do a lot of civic clubs, fundraisers, do a lot of speaking about her and the book festivals too. But we figured the other day, I think since July, 75 events in 16 states, and got a heavy schedule for the rest of 2016 and into 2017 also.
So this story, Mr. Owida's Guide to Gardening, it's not a gardening book necessarily.
Well, you know what? Yeah, I say that all the time too, but I was just at the State Botanical Garden of Georgia. I did a garden club awards luncheon in Frankfurt. I did a garden club in Charleston, and all those people tell me it is about gardening. So,
but I guess what I'm getting at, there's a whole lot more to this story
absolutely.
Than just the soil and the roots.
Yes, it's a story of her friendship with Jance Author, a gardener from Kenya, who not only transformed our garden and our yard, which was in sad state of disrepair, but he transformed her life and transformed the way she looks at things. And so I spend a lot of time talking about the enduring messages of the book and what makes it resonate so widely and deeply.
When we talk about the enduring message, your wife was a writer, or she was just inspired by her relationship with...
She was a writer. She was a longtime writer, and she wrote, she was a high school English teacher, but she always wanted to write a book like this, and she sold articles. She referred to her early years as her pretend writing career in the 80s and the 90s, but she sold 12 Southern journals to Southern Living, the article that's on the inside back page that Rick Bragg writes now. She sold 12 of those, and she sold articles to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. She had 2 novels that were agented but not sold. But then in 2002, she met Jance Author, and she decided to start writing this book.
And it changed her life.
Yes, it did.
It changed her life. So now that your wife is gone, and you're out there, letting people know about this beautiful gift that she left to us, what happens then when you come to the point where everybody's read it or nobody wants to read it anymore? Are there plans to go one step further, perhaps with you at the helm?
Maybe. And she does have 2 finished novels that are on the shelf. People have encouraged me to tell my story, which is sort of unusual because we have 3 kids, and all of us are marketing this book without the author, which is sort of an unusual story. So that's sort of the story behind the story. Our son is a documentary filmmaker, our youngest, and he's making a documentary about that part of the story. So there are lots of side stories here, but I think that this book has a lot of legs. It has, even though when you get to the end of the story, which in time is 2008, you will not be surprised that the person who is telling you the story, Carol Wall, dies several years later, because she writes a lot about her cancer. But that being said, it's not a book about cancer, and it's not a book about dying. It is a book about living, and the lessons that he teaches her and that she teaches us are lessons for living, and that's what's keeping me out here.
That was my next question, is just that's got to be the inspiration for you to continue.
It is, and the response that we get everywhere we go is when you talk about what happens when everybody reads it, that's where we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to that tipping point, like the Yaya Sisterhood and books like that have that sort of arc that they just go, and then you have a feature film, and so that's what we're trying to do. And we got some work to do before we do that, but it's a lot of fun doing it.
And it's all in the name of your late wife.
It is, that's right.
Would she be proud?
I think so. Yeah, she told one of the last things she said, and Phil, the youngest, who's the documentary filmmaker, was her favorite by far. All of us
even
know
though
that.
moms don't have favorites.
Oh, yes, they do, too. I mean, if you took the 3 kids and me, it's not even close. She would pick him. She told him in July or August, and she was really getting sick then. We called hospice in August. And she told him, "You take care of our book." So that's what we're doing.
Thank you for sharing that beautiful, poignant story. We've been talking with Richard Wall about the book, Mr. Owita's Guide to Gardening, How I Learned the Unexpected Joy of a Green Thumb and an Open Heart, by his late wife, Carol Wall. Outside the Book continues from the 2016 Southern Kentucky Book Festival. I'm Barbara Deeb, and I'm honored to have with me Michael Hingson, who's joining us right now with his guide dog, Africa. Now, you have a fascinating story, and we would probably need 3 shows to tell your whole story, but You were born blind? Born.
I was born blind born in 1950, premature, given too much oxygen, which caused blindness. So essentially born blind.
Okay, but you had the wonderful fortune to grow up in a family where you were not treated as sightless.
My parents were told to send me away because no blind child could ever grow up to amount to anything in society. And my parents said that's absolutely not true. So they brought me home, and I was brought up with the attitude that I could do whatever I chose to do, and that I could make something of my life if I wanted to do that. I was given the same kind of responsibility as my older brother and raised just as any other child would be.
That's a beautiful gift from your parents. You have 2 books, Thunderdog and Running with Roselle.
Right.
And the motivation for this, of course, is I understand it is your goal to educate the world about parity in a sighted world.
It is a sighted world just because there are more of all of you than there are blind people. So all y'all have the lion's share of visibility, and as a result the world is made up in a way to cater to people who can see. But what we really ought to be is an inclusive world. In our society today, we are hearing about so many different kinds of people, whether it be different religions, whether it be different colors, even sexual orientation, and women for that matter. It's kind of funny to hear women called a minority when there are more women than men. But I understand that, again, that's the way the world has been. But the world is changing, and the world needs to change based on disabilities as well. You know, the largest minority in this country, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, is disabilities. 20% of all people have a disability. Now, there are a lot of disabilities, of course, but by the way the world is operating today, you don't hear disabilities discussed. One of the presidential candidates has anything related to disabilities on their website, and even there, Hillary Clinton doesn't say a lot about disabilities.
But it's mentioned. You know, I have to say something.
But it's mentioned.
Yeah, Michael, before we got started,
Yeah.
you were talking about the books, your book, and you said, I only see you have one, and I made a little joke at you, and you said, look up the definition of see. Share that.
Well, see is something that we all use. The definition of see, in part in the dictionary, is to perceive. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is with the eye. And when people say, oh, well, you can't see, the reality is, as I say in Thunderdog here, don't let your sight get in the way of your vision. The fact is that I see just like you do. I don't see in the same way that you do, but I see. I see with every sense that I have. I wish more people used more of their senses and not just their eyes.
Or just common sense in general. Now, you have a fascinating story, and Roselle was your guide dog for a long time, and she was with you on that fated day of September 11th. You were in the World Trade Center.
Right. I was working in the World Trade Center on September 11th. I ran an office for a computer company, Quantum Corporation. I was hired to open a New York facility and to staff it and make it work to sell our products as well as to provide appropriate support for them. So I did that, and on September 11th, we were going to be conducting a sales training seminar when the aircraft struck the tower, and of course the world changed.
You were on what floor?
I was on the 78th floor of the North Tower, or Tower 1.
Do you remember that day?
Oh, absolutely, vividly. I remember the first thing that happened is we heard sort of a muffled explosion, and then the building, if you imagine my arm as the building, and as I tip it toward you, that's what the building did. We actually moved, I think, about 20 feet before the building stopped and came back. Buildings, as we learned later, are made to be flexible when they're very tall because they will be buffeted by winds and so on. So I immediately jumped into action, if you will, and encouraged people to go to the stairs, not to take the elevator, because a colleague of mine who was in the office that day was seeing fire and burning debris falling outside our window. So I got people to finally focus. My colleague David got them to the stairs. Then after we knew everyone had left the tower, David, Frank, Roselle, and I left the building by starting down the stairs.
Your guide dog.
Roselle, right.
You know, as you're telling me this story, I'm hearing and thinking what a true advantage in that moment you had because of your sharpened perceptions and senses in other ways.
Well, yes and no. people often try to think of it that way, but that's not really the case. It's a mindset. I went into that building every day wondering if for some reason there might be an emergency and how would I be able to react to it and how would I get out. I learned what to do to travel around the complex. I learned how to travel around New York because I had developed those skills as a blind person. I learned how to live as a blind person and how to live in the same world as everyone else, although doing part of what I did in different ways. So it wasn't that senses were sharper or anything like that. It's that I learned to use the senses that I had. I also, as we talk in Thunderdog, was observing some things or seeing things that David, my colleague, was not. When he was panicking and saying there's fire and smoke and millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside the window, what I was observing was Roselle sitting next to me, not reacting at all. Now, what you need to understand is Roselle was afraid of thunder, but nothing was fazing her. She was acting like, who woke me up? I was sleeping peacefully, and all of a sudden I can't sleep anymore because there's too much noise and everything else is going on. That told me that whatever was going on wasn't so urgent that we couldn't evacuate in an orderly way.
So you were reading her?
I was reading her as she reads me, because if I had started to panic, that's going to make her more nervous, and as a result, she's going to be looking at me rather than focusing on what I want her to do, which is to guide and help us leave the complex. So it's a team effort, which is part of what we talk about in Thunderdog. It's all about the team.
It's a beautiful, beautiful legacy to guide dogs and to people with disabilities. Running with Roselle and Thunderdog are your books. Michael Hingson, you lost Roselle in June of
June 2011, and then I received Africa. Actually, a couple of years later, I had another guide dog in between, just for a brief period. So now, Africa and I travel the country talking about all the things that we talked about earlier, trying to get people to understand that normal is never going to be the same, and that we need to understand that normal isn't necessarily the way we think it is. We need to be a more inclusive world.
Thank you so much for including us in your world. We've been talking with Michael Hingson from Outside the Book. Outside the Book continues from the 2016 Southern Kentucky Festival of Books. I'm Barbara Deeb, and I am delighted to have with us right now Garth Stein. Now, Garth, I wish we had more time to pick your brain, but we don't. We just talked to Michael.
You wouldn't find much there, trust me.
I bet we would. Michael Hingson just left, and he had his guide dog with him, and I thought how appropriate then that we're bringing you up to talk about books that have such a central character as a dog.
Yes, the dog theme is very much in. Yes, my dog is not a helping dog, though. Enzo is just a companion, but he is obsessed with race car driving. So.
Okay, and you're obsessed with race car driving.
I have been at times in my life, yes.
Not anymore?
Well, I got out of it at some point because it just, like anything else, if you want to be good at it, you have to put all of your time and energy and money into it, and I wasn't able to do that. So
you have to just sell some more books, right?
Oh, yes. Well.
Yes, there you go. A passion for the written word is what you say you have. And have we lost passion for the word?
I think that certainly there's a waning to it, especially with the young people these days. Everything is so instantaneous, and 140 words or characters or less. Right? Yeah. So I do think long-form fiction is something that is becoming a little like the long-playing record. But I think it's immensely important to us as individuals, but also to our society as a whole. To read a book, you have to put something of yourself into it. You have to exhibit empathy. And by exhibiting empathy, we make our communities stronger because we understand that we're not all the same. It's not a one-size-fits-all, and that we have to recognize that we can agree to disagree. This is something we don't have in, for instance, presidential politics.
Okay, we're not going to get into presidential politics.
Oh, no, come on, let's do it.
No. But you have a background as a documentary filmmaker.
Yes.
You have a really interesting background. But, there's an underlying theme here, and it's very evident. You're a storyteller.
I think that's the key, is that I really enjoy telling a good story. For years, I did it as a nonfiction film, which was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. But now I've found my groove, I think, with long-form fiction. And it affords me a sort of lifestyle, I can coach my kids' soccer team if I want to.
Right.
Or,
It allows you that freedom.
Yeah, which is kind of nice.
Your books are extremely popular, and I'm curious because I think a lot of people always want to know, how does my favorite writer do what he does? So do you have a system? Do you have a schedule?
Wish.
No.
I wish I had a system.
Soccer game, come home right?
I have friends who who have all these, like, the ways, I get up at 5:30 in the morning and I have 2 Oreo cookies, and
right.
I can't do that. I'm a binge writer. And I'll write, when it comes and wherever it is, I have to do it. And as a matter of fact, last night I was able to text my wife and say, well, I'm coming home tomorrow, and I finished the first draft of my new book. So I did it in the hotel room right across the parking lot.
Well, won't people love to know that? And that's the new book.
That's my new book, yeah.
Okay, do we know what it's called yet?
We can't tell you, because then we'll have to...
shoot me or do something terrible. But now you know where it was written and
You'll know
finished.
that I put the first draft, crowning touches, went on in room 207 of the Staybridge Inn.
There you go. Now let's talk a little bit about one of your books, or you co-produced about the 1992 Democratic National Convention, the last party. So when you were joking a little bit ago about talking about presidential politics, you probably really would like to do that.
Well, the last party was with Robert Downey Jr. We made it in '92, which was the year that Clinton first took over, and it was kind of a man on the street sort of thing, but we didn't really know what we were doing, and it was before digital age, so everybody didn't have a camera, and we were shooting in 16 millimeter film and to the Republican and Democratic conventions, and had a real blast doing it. The film is a disaster. It's horrible. You can see it on YouTube. It's really, really not good, but it was so much fun to make.
And a great experience. Talking about making, and your life, and you've got a very full life. You have children, you live in Seattle, you have a wife, you have a dog named Comet. But also you've written about things in your life. Your sister's brain surgery turned out to be the impetus for something?
Yeah, I made a documentary film about her actual surgery called When Your Head's Not a Head, It's a Nut, which was on PBS years ago. And then I used the epilepsy that she grew up with. I gave to a character in my second book, How Evan Broke His Head and Other Secrets. It really is dealing more about how epilepsy affects an entire family, not just the person who has it. And as a younger brother, I had sort of the catbird seat of seeing what epilepsy was all about, how it affected my sister, and also how it affected my parents, which was very, very profoundly. So I do take things from the past. My first book, Raven Stole the Moon, is set in Wrangell, Alaska, which is where my mother is from, this small fishing village, and it uses Tlingit Indian myths, which is my mother's side of the family. So, I try to pull things in and tell a good story, and also have something to think about. I want to be a little provocative.
Yes, motivate that thought. Now, we don't have it on the table, but you have a children's book as well.
Yes,
with Enzo,
little Enzo, we
character.
call those. Yes, there's 2 of them. The third one is coming out this fall, Halloween. Enzo's very scary. Halloween is so sweet. It was just sort of like, I was getting people were asking me, a sequel to The Art of Racing in the Rain, can't there be a sequel? I said, no, the dog dies, sorry.
Oh, you just gave it away if you haven't read the book.
I gave it away in the first chapter. Okay. I want everyone to know up front that it's not about death, it's about life. It's about an affirmation of living. So we continued the story, though, with the Little Enzo books, which are really, they're fun to write. I love children's books, and I want to keep doing that, too.
Well, I hope you keep doing exactly what you're doing and more. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
We've been joined by author, documentary filmmaker, storyteller, Garth Stein. That's going to wrap it up for this edition of Outside the Book, coming to you live from the Southern Kentucky Festival of Books.